We want to talk about the Canadian history. We must preserve it. Nothing speaks Canada more than the Snowbird team. I'm standing here with Captain Edelson. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
And I looked at the history of the Snowbird team. It stretches all the way back to 1924 with when they formed the RCAF. 1929 to 1932 they had flying Siskins. There were 3 biplanes. And then it went over to 1942 when 431 Bomber Squadron was formed, disbanded in 1945, all the way up to 1959 and 1963 with the Golden Hawks, then the Golden Centenaries, and now the Snowbirds in 1971.
There is a long history. It's a lot of things that you've kind of smushed together. So the RCAF was officially sanctioned with the Royal in 1924. We're celebrating 90 years this year. You can actually see there's a little bit of 90th artwork on the tails of our jets. The CF-18 is painted similarly. The squadron, 431 Squadron, was born in World War II, but air demonstration teams have had a role in the RCAF since its origin. Basically, aerobatic flying was developed as kind of a training tool in dogfighting, and that's still some of the basic maneuvers that air show demonstration teams still use today. So to fast forward through all the teams that we've had, you mentioned the Siskins, the Golden Centenaires, there was a Red Knight, there were Black Knights, there were the Fireballs, there was a large demonstration history right up until the present, which is now Canada's jet team is the Snowbirds. 44 years, it was born in 71, and we mark our 44th year this year as the national team.
How long have you been with the Snowbirds for?
This is my 3rd year.
And what kind of aircrafts? I know that you're flying the Tudor one. I think it's called the CT-114.
Right. So the CT-114 is the aircraft behind us. It was built by Canadair, designed and built here in Canada, and was designed on purpose to be a training aircraft. That's why the seats are side by side. It's kind of a little bit of an archaic design. Obviously, you get more drag side by side. Most trainers are now front to back. But what side by side allowed, you could have the instructor and the student watching each other. Exactly, you know, watch me do this, watch me do that. And there were 2 sets of mirrored controls. The aircraft can be flown from either the left seat or the right seat, which makes it very functional for the team because depending on what side of the formation the pilot is flying on, he will fly on that inside side of the aircraft. On the right side of the formation, they'll fly in the left seat and vice versa. So it's a very, very good aircraft for flying in demonstration. It's very stable. It's not overly powerful, it's not overly fast, so the boss can keep the team in front of the crowds for long periods of time. And it carries just enough gas to do a really solid 35-minute show for the audiences all over Canada. 44 years, you basically can't go anywhere in this country without having the public recognize what and who the Snowbirds are.
What speed are you, when you're in formation, are you going about 300-400 miles an hour?
Well, it depends. Obviously, at the bottom of the loops, you're going to be going quite a lot faster. At the top of the loops, it's a little bit slower. It's measured in knots, which is about 1.8 kilometers per knot. So it's almost a factor of 2. And at the bottom, you'll see 300 plus knots. So you're getting, you know, close to 600, low 5s. When the team is actually, when the 2 planes are flying at each other, the closing speed is about 1,000 kilometers an hour. So it happens pretty quick.
And how many air shows does the Snowbirds do in an average year?
Typically, we do between 50 and 60 shows, flying events during the year, in anywhere between 30 and 40 locations. So for Toronto, for example, there's 3 shows, but there's just 1 location. And that's why the numbers are off a little bit.
In regards to the air show, you know, for every hour, for air show wise, how many hours of practice does it take to make a successful air show?
It's a lot. It depends what sort of parameters you'd want to set. To train a pilot in the RCAF takes a long time. You know, you have to get the person into the forces, you have to get them through basic training, all the phases of flight training, they earn their wings, then they start accumulating hours, and then once they have enough hours accumulated, they can apply for the Snowbird team. And then the Snowbird training starts. So just to be able to put your name into the ring to apply for the team, you could be looking probably an average of 10 plus years. And then for every hour that the team flies in front of a crowd, we try to fly about 100 training missions, 100 plus training missions before the team sets out for Comox to do a really intensive spring workup before we take the show on the road. But that's just the flying. You know, there's the studying, there's the briefing, there's watching the tape. I couldn't really put a factor on it, but it's a lot. There's a lot of work that goes into presenting that 35-minute spectacle everywhere in the country. And that's not just the pilots. These are the technicians that fix the aircraft, which are really the backbone of the squadron. You know, the planes do require maintenance. They do get a really hard workout often. So you need to train the technicians. You need to get the technicians with all their checks and qualifications. And then they're putting in really long hours too. So it's really a team effort that puts that kind of 35-minute spectacle in front of Canadian eyes. But the amount of work behind that is phenomenal.
One of the non-profit foundations that you're an ambassador for, the Snowbirds ambassador for, it's called Child Foundation. I know it's dealing with some children that have some very serious illnesses. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we actually have two principal charities that we endorse during the course of the year. One of them is called Child, which is children with intestinal and liver disease. And we have been working with them for about 12 years. And we go typically to British Columbia and do a show for these sick kids and a lot of their supporters and fundraisers, and basically spend some time with these really interesting children, have a lot of fun for a few hours in a few days, and try to raise some awareness, try to educate and also entertain. We also are working more recently with JDRF, which is a Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. It's quite popular. It's very popular in North America and even internationally. And we've just started working with them, and we're looking to do a similar type of program that we do with JDR, with Child.
And looking at these planes right here, what is the average age of one of these aircrafts right here?
Well, they started coming out of the factory in 1963. So they're in the neighborhood of 50 years old, but there's a bit of a misconception there because not all of these aircraft were flown continually for 50 years. The planes were actually retired as the principal trainer in 1999, 15 years ago. And a lot of them hadn't really flown since then until they came out of storage and were sort of reborn as Snowbirds. So they are 50 years old, like they started coming out of the factory in Montreal in 1963, but it's all about hours on airframe. So a calendar year doesn't really equate to how old, I guess, they actually are.
Do you have any of those Avro Lancaster aircrafts, World War II bombers? It's listed on your website that they're actually one of the aircraft that the Snowbirds fly.
Sure. Well, the squadron, when it began in World War II, flew 3 different bombers. It started as a bomber squadron. That's where 431 began, the Iroquois squadron. We don't have any Lancasters, though. There's only one Lancaster in Canada, and that's at the Hamilton War Museum. But no, we don't have any of those anymore.
I know the motto for your squadron is called the Warriors in the Air.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of that?
Well, again, that's part of our squadron's history when it began as a bomber squadron. They originally flew Halifaxes and Handley Pages, and then moved on to Lancasters in a very short time in World War II. They flew a lot of missions and they lost a lot of people. So it's a history you want to remain conscious of where it began in England and what the roles and the histories and the special traditions of the squadron are, and we do our best to maintain that proud history for 431 Squadron, and enjoy representing the Canadian Forces, the skill, the professionalism, the teamwork of everyone in the Canadian Forces.
How long could you see the Snowbirds lasting for? Are we talking another 20 years, or is this going to be decades to come?
I really couldn't answer that. That's really a political decision. We'll fly as long as we are allowed to. That's the government of the day will decide when the Snowbirds continue or end.
Well, hopefully it's for decades to come, because I think that this is the icon of Canada. Nothing says Canadian history more than the Snowbirds, in my opinion. Thank you so much for your time there, Captain.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for coming out.